Dan Ryan, thanks again for coming on Church and State. Now, you're a director of the Lion Rock Institute think tank. I want to ask you more about what the Lion Rock does specifically, but first off, what is a think tank? What does a think tank do?
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting question, David. I mean, think tanks started off in the United States and other places, and what they were meant to do is to provide something separate to the university system, where independent ideas could be advocated and put through, in particular, broached to the general public. You very rarely get academics who are capable of writing stuff for mainstream publications, the general public. And think tanks have typically been established to promote, greater economic liberty in Europe and America, and recently in Australia. The IPA, Institute of Public Affairs, is a think tank. The Centre for Independent Studies in Sydney is a think tank. I'm also involved with a smaller think tank here in Brisbane called the Australian Institute for Progress. And they are trying to advocate for greater liberty and liberal ideas in Australia and elsewhere, which the guys who are involved in it feel aren't adequately served in many cases by the university system. And because of the success that think tanks have had over the years, often the universities have tried to sort of establish their own little departments and rebadge them as think tanks because of the sort of influence that they have had over the years. Yeah, kudos have had over the years. On the China side, it's kind of interesting. China, think tanks are also independent, autonomous organisations, self-funding, separate from the state, the civil associations. And as a result, there aren't really any bona fide, with the exception of one, which is probably unregistered, there aren't any bona fide true think tanks in China. There's the China Academy of Social Sciences, which is part of the government, effectively, more like part of the university system, but there's not any ones that are outside the system kind of writing those pungent op-eds telling you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between a think tank and a lobby group?
Well, think tanks generally have a coherent set of philosophy which exists without the need for a think tank at all. You can say, well, okay, they're directly influenced by the works of this and that other philosopher, Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman types of people. Whereas a lobby group tends to function purely about, if you're a real estate lobby group, well, you're functioning purely for your own particular industry, whereas think tanks tend to be broader than that. And I mean, the criticism is always made that, think tanks are just lobby groups, but they're not really, and the successful ones aren't. And certainly my experience has been that, if anything, there's no natural constituency. We're always saying to people, look, you can support us if you support the ideas, but we're not going to push your particular barrow, and so people often people don't quite get that. They assume, like, people you approach to help fund you, they think that, you must be pushing someone's barrow. Guess what? No, we're actually pretty pure in that respect.
Okay. So what's the Lion Rock Institute's think tank? What's its charter? What's its purpose?
So it's very similar to, say, I guess, Cato, Heritage, the IPA types of think tanks. It's much more concerned with ensuring economic liberty in Hong Kong, that it remains a very free place to do business. That's particularly important because, since the handover of Hong Kong to mainland China in 1997, the handover of sovereignty, Hong Kong has continued to exist as a dynamic, a financial centre. But there are all sorts of threats to that. Like, people don't like these little bastions of freedom all that much. And so there are subtle threats from mainland China, but often the threats come from bureaucrats in, say, Australia, Europe, US, who want to introduce the same level of regulation or and taxes that you have in these other jurisdictions.
I'm really, really fascinated by Hong Kong and your work in particular, because Hong Kong is this aberration in the Chinese landscape, where on one hand you've got perhaps the greatest communist regime that ever existed, just totally oppressing, controlling and micromanaging every level of people's lives and economies and businesses and government, one party, etc. But on the other hand, Hong Kong, which now is attached to mainland China governmentally, Hong Kong has been consistently voted as the freest market with the least regulation and the most capitalism, for want of a better word, in the world.
Yeah.
Something that Western countries should look at with envy and go, wow, this is working.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that it exists and continues to exist under the control of and ownership of a communist regime. It's also interesting that you're telling me that Western governments and supposedly free market societies are trying to reduce their freedom, increase their regulation.
Yeah, I mean, if I always say that, British bureaucrats and Australian bureaucrats, EU bureaucrats always come to Hong Kong and they are telling people, you should adopt this and that other regulation that we have over there. And there's, there's pressure, significant pressure that's brought to bear. And that, the Hong Kong bureaucrats, such as they are, often think, wouldn't it be nice if I had my own government department doing this, that, and the other that you guys have? What status, what sort of power I would have? But if Hong Kong had the same level of regulation or taxes that Australia or EU or even the US had, it would be it would kill Hong Kong. It would and it would basically make it the distinction between Hong Kong and mainland China would disappear.
Okay, so the Lion Rock Institute fights for the consistency and the constancy of the Hong Kong market.
Yeah.
Tell me. Let's get into some nuts and bolts. What are some of the regulations that that some people have suggested or tried to put in for their own benefit, which would be contrary? What are some of the specific regulations or tax policies, etc., that you've had to resist? And
okay. Well, I mean, they always want to introduce a GST in Hong Kong. We're constantly having to fight that battle. And Hong Kong doesn't have a GST, doesn't have capital gains tax, doesn't have, all sorts of other nasties, fringe benefits tax. There are labour laws that Australia has, a centralised wage fixing scheme. There are Australian bureaucrats who are often up there who'd love to see that in Hong Kong. And interestingly, we fought one battle about on that, and then you had members of the Maritime Union of Australia marching through the streets of Hong Kong as part of the International Labour Organization. So they're all interconnected, these guys, and it was just amazing. I was like, God. In many ways, the battles that Hong Kong fights are the battles that were lost in Australia in respect to economic liberty in 1901. Yeah. So it's sort of interesting in that respect, seeing it.
Tax rate. What's the? I don't want to get into too much detail. We want to keep the segment short. This could be a fun sequel. Yeah. But what's the income tax rate? How's the personal tax rate work in Hong Kong?
So think about. It's not quite this, but think of it at a flat 15%. Okay. That is the top marginal tax rate.
So they have marginal tax rate?
There's a slight digression. It's about 13 to 15%, but a lot of people don't even qualify to pay personal income tax.
What's the population base of Hong Kong?
It's about 8 million, I think, now.
Okay. So a third of the size of Australia?
Yeah.
15% tax rate?
Yeah.
What's the...
So no capital gains, no fringe benefits tax, no... I mean, you have library fines and parking fines, but you have, but so many of the other taxes that we take for no GST. No, there's stamp duty on property. That's where they earn most of their revenue from. But there's no GST. So that lightens things up quite a lot.
How big is Hong Kong compared to something Australians would relate to?
Well, Australians are very familiar with... I mean, there's a lot of Australians that live up in Hong Kong, so it's not that foreign to...
Is Hong Kong half the size of Tasmania?
It's much smaller. No, it would be smaller than Greater Metropolitan Sydney, for sure.
Okay.
If less.
Property would be a huge market there then, at a premium with
it is.
A third of the population in such a tiny area.
It is an issue, yeah. And it's increased over the last 10 years quite dramatically, but it's ups and downs. I mean, Hong Kong, a mate of mine, Ron Manners, who is involved in a think tank in WA, he always used to say Kalgoorlie and Hong Kong. I like both of them because they're not crybaby towns. Markets go up, markets go down, and people just dust off their jeans and then get back up again. That probably used to be more true than it once was. There's a bit of there's a lot more calls from the Hong Kong local population.
The other thing I want to just a snapshot of is labour. I hate fixed wages nationally. It's just. But tell me how that works. What's that look like in Hong Kong? Who's exploited and who's doing what anyway?
It's interesting. I mean, Hong Kong, it's a developed place. People's wages are high, typically, but there's what we don't have in Australia is this class from the Philippines, typically, who are the maids, who are indentured, effectively. Labour in Hong Kong, and they look after many people's kids and clean their houses and all the rest of it, and then congregate on a Sunday. So that is different, and I don't think Australians would really accept that that sort of indentured class of people there working for not very high wages. It upsets the sort of sense of national kind of solidarity where, okay, it's a free market, but we get to, the plumber can go to the Prime Minister's house.
People leave the Philippines, are attracted to Hong Kong to get exploited by...
it's for the labour. What I'm trying to say is that, and obviously, there's an economic case for that. What I'm trying to say is that I think in Australia, I like the idea that a plumber can come to the Prime Minister's house and there's a sort of understanding that they'll be speaking the same language. They sort of, the Prime Minister wants to sort of, feel like he's got some sort of solidarity with the plumber.
Right.
Whereas in Hong Kong, because you have a different group of people
They're
there.
seen as a second class.
Well, there's a lot of you're saying exploitation. I know that's a sort of loaded term and it can be used inaccurately, but it does create a sort of second tier citizenship because they're not citizens of Hong Kong, right? Yeah. They're different, and so they can only work as labourers. So then it's not a true free market for their labour.
So is that a direct result of their lack of a minimum wage?
They existed prior to. They're actually carved out of the current minimum wage regime. Those guys, they have their own set because they're not able to go. You can only work within their designated classes of service. They can't go and apply to be something else.
It sounds complicated.
Yeah, it is. It is a bit complicated. But if you asked about David, that's one of the kind of key differences.
So what about, is there another policy that the Lion Rock is fighting to hold the ground on?
Oh, there's all sorts of low-level nanny state stuff as well. There's Hong Kong, despite its free market reputation, also has one of the largest amounts of public housing. About sort of 50% or thereabouts of the people live in public housing in Hong Kong, which is a lot, right?
Yeah.
And so that's not always the best way. There's people rorting the system, frankly.
Of course.
And then, like I said, there's low-level nanny state staff, and there's no shortage of things, really. People, officious little types trying to, regulate the number of people who can get involved in a particular market. There's people, Uber has the same type of battles there as it has here. There's those type of people where particular type of incumbents want to stop new entrants or stop economic dynamism because they like the status quo, and that's sometimes there's arguments, there's legitimate reasons for that. Most of the time, there's not. Yep.
Awesome. Okay, well, when we come back, let's talk about human rights in China, and we'll see how they're progressing in that area.
Thanks, Ray.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please like it and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We'd love to keep you informed, so head over to churchandstate.com.au and subscribe to email updates. We can keep you in the loop. Also, we've got another great video I think you'd love right there.